Daylight won't stop flashing lights. Feels like 1,000 years have gone by without you. I miss someone like you, but wanna tell you some things.
Hey everybody, you're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
I'm Steve Morey.
And that's all you get tonight.
Nothing else.
Nothing
That's all
else.
you.
Bryan is celebrating his partner Pat's birthday. Happy birthday, Pat. And Justin is still in the process of a move. So, unfortunately, we don't have those gentlemen with us. But we do have a very special guest to talk about her graphic novel, Oh Human Star. We have Blue Delliquanti. And we'll be back with her interview right after you hear this explosion. And we're back with an interview. And this time we have Blue Delliquanti with us for the show. Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
We're doing good apart from some con crud that we're still dealing with. But apart from that, net better than worse. So
That's good to hear.
So, Blue, I was going to have an introduction for you, but you jumped in there with a hello. So why don't you introduce yourself then?
Yeah, sorry about that. My name is
problem.
Blue Delliquanti. I am a cartoonist. I'm the creator of the online comic Oh Human Star, which has been running since 2012. And then I work on a few other projects on the side. But for the time being, Oh Human Star is kind of my main beloved project.
And if you had to provide an elevator pitch in regard to what Oh Human Star is about, what would it be?
Yeah, basically the thing I tell people is that Oh Human Star is about an inventor and his unconventional robot family. So it includes a gay romance between two mature inventors and then the female android that they are raising as a child. So there is science fiction, transhumanism, robots, romance, and family drama.
Okay. I've said this on the show before, and I kind of strong-armed Steve into buying your graphic novel at New York Comic Con. At this point, a week and a half ago. And
Yeah, really twisted my arm. It was really tough for me to say yes on that.
I know. Yeah. Mustachioed Silver Daddy on the cover. It was going to be a tough sell for you, I know. But I have to say that this has been one of the most enjoyable graphic novels I have read in a long time. I've been catching up on the webcomic that correct me if I'm wrong, you have the first three sequences in the first graphic novel?
Yes, the first collection has chapters 1 through 3, and then the upcoming second volume would include chapters 4, 5, and then a bonus side story that has previously appeared in a different anthology.
Okay, and you have something gearing up in relation to that second volume, right?
That's right. I am currently in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign to not only raise funds for a print volume of Volume 2, but also a reprint of Volume 1, since the 1,000 count print run of Volume 1 is almost out after 2 years.
All right. As you can probably surmise from a show called Comic Book Bears, we read a lot of gay comic fiction. Mm-hmm. And I think a fault of a lot of gay comic fiction is sometimes the characters are so drowned in their queerness that it makes them unrelatable in some ways. And I think one thing you have done here that I just think is amazing is that you just provide that as just one interesting part of them. And in some ways that gives you the space to express the other things that define them.
I was just going to say, I appreciate you recognizing that, because that's definitely something that I worked pretty hard when I was developing the characters and sort of trying to figure out what kind of story I wanted to tell. I wanted to very much make, their queerness and their queer identity is a component of the story and sort of like their, why they're going through the things they're going through. But also, you're right, it's not the entirety of their story or even their conflict. It's just sort of an aspect of their identity that comes into factor in with all these other things, including like, being revived in a robot body after being dead for 16 years, or, trying to, come off as a human girl, in a world where robots and androids are just as common. Or, I like realizing that, in this case, like, queerness is just another part of your identity, but, one that doesn't necessarily have to be the be all end all drama of your story.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I also appreciated about the book is that there is this sense of the unraveling of these characters' history. It's not presented to you in a very clear function, and in a sense, there's still a lot of mystery, even at the most current point you are in the webcomic. We still have a lot of question marks hanging over these characters. Now, I'm certain that you have an end point for these characters, but in approaching it in that fashion where you choose to unravel instead of present stuff on a platter, have the characters in some way surprised you?
Oh, yeah, they definitely have. In a lot of senses, the world outside the three main characters has grown and, gotten more complex, considerably so. And it was sort of through figuring out how these, three people interact with, the world around them, like, people they meet through, the various actions they take, and sort of how they, incorporate this into the main story. Like, I feel like that has grown a lot, and that's affected the, central mystery. And it's kind of just made the world seem larger than when I started plotting it out. Like, I kind of just became more interested in, fleshing out this world and making it interesting, and then figuring out how these characters fit in that world, outside their little family, their unconventional family. So yeah, in that sense, it definitely has grown, and I surprised myself with, what I wanted to incorporate in the story, because there's some stuff that definitely was not there from the start.
Right. But yeah, I do think the way you present the story and the way you let it unfold, in some ways adds to the emotional engagement that you have with these characters. And it's rare for me to be rooting for everybody, but I tend to do that. And honestly, when I turned that page and you first saw Alastair and Brendan kiss, it can't conceive of somebody not having a smile on their face when you do see that moment. Can you get into a little bit about the family that has formed from this relationship? Because that really is the core of the story, and some of the most complex issues arise from the interaction of these three characters.
Yeah, I definitely can. To sort of expand upon the premise, the idea is that the main protagonist, Alastair Sterling, is this older inventor who's sort of trying to, tough it out on his own, and, just trying to make himself, noticed in this robotics industry he's chosen to specialize in. And then into his life, 16 years before the main story, or no, excuse me, more like 20 years, he ends up hiring this, younger man, like right out of college. He's really, interested and has his own ideas about what the future of robotics looks like. And they, start this relationship that Al is, wants to keep hidden for various reasons. And Brendan doesn't really, know whether Al's ashamed of him or not. But they have this, like, connection that lasts throughout, past their, the end of their relationship, which terminates really in Al's death. Like, a few years after their relationship has begun, Al dies from an illness unexpectedly, and Brendan makes the impulsive decision to try and save a copy of Al's memories and mind in a digital format. And the imperfect copy that results ends up becoming the android Sulla that Brendan sort of raises as a child, just kind of teaching it and getting it used to being a near human android. And then 3 years prior to Al returning into the story as in a robot body, Sulla comes out as a trans girl. So that's what Al comes back to, is not only is his partner's still alive, still, pining for him and, feeling really regretful about the actions that led to the end of their relationship and wanting to reconcile. But there's also this, girl who is essentially like his long lost child and has grown up idolizing and learning a lot about Al, and she just really wants to have him in her life. So yeah, it is kind of like this, patched together family that they are all really trying to make it work, but there's a lot of secrecy and, things that haven't been disclosed to each other and, things that could impede their potential happiness.
Now, also at the core of the story is this heavy content in relation to technology and artificial intelligence and robotics. Is that something that you already had a working knowledge of, or is that something that you explored for this story, or just something that you've always had an interest in? Where did that come from?
It's something I've always definitely had an interest in, and I was always really interested in, cyberpunk stories about, the advancement of technology. Like I've had a subscription to Wired magazine since I was about 13. Like it's just something that I always enjoyed, keeping tabs on. But as I started not only, posting the story, I found that a lot of my readers were real programmers. And so they would be, reading this and they'd be like, oh, this is so cool. How did you know about this, advancement? Or like, how do you think, artificial intelligent developments work in this particular way? And I'll be like, I don't know. I'm kind of just winging it based on, a bit of research that I'm doing and wishful thinking. So a lot of it is winging it in front of these readers who practically know way more about it than I do. But yeah, no, I've always been super interested in artificial intelligence, not just like the, more realistic advances that we've seen in our lifetime, but, what that could mean, like the consequences, even the more outlandish or unlikely ones, what that actually means to have access to, brain scanning technology and being able to, give yourself another chance at life or adapt, like changing your identity. Like the consequences of that are amazing story fodder. And there's a lot of ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I also appreciated is, even though you have that device in front of you, you never use the technology as a metaphor for queer or trans issues. Instead, you just incorporate that into this real collective sense of how to communicate and how to interact with one another and how to interact with the newness of what technology offers. It was really enjoyable seeing that, because I don't want to name the work of art, but one did that and that turned me off. So
yeah, no, I've seen variations of that happen a lot where, like, a certain science fiction theme, stands in for a certain, marginalized identity, but nobody of that particular marginalized identity actually exists within that universe. And that's silly. Like, it's, I think technology is a great way to talk about those themes, but talk about in conjunction with, people who actually, live those lives. Mm-hmm. Like, I think they deserve to have cool, cyberpunk adventures just as much as anybody else.
Well, I tend to be an interview hog, and one device that we have employed is the passing of the interview baton, which I'm going to do right now. So, Steve, what do you have for Blue there?
Blue, you can trust me. I've been trying to steal that baton for a while. But he keeps it really close to his chest, so I can't really grab it. But, I also really enjoyed the first volume. It's, the themes that I recognized in it, of course, the idea of artificial intelligence, the philosophy behind, what makes a person, is a person some of their memories and experiences, or is there something more? I mean, these are really great themes that you see in some of the better works of science fiction out there. So I was really excited to see that here in this work. alongside of, queer identity and trans and gay experiences, which is just really, it's really nice to be able to see that in a work such as this. And I was very pleased to be able to read it. So again, Bill, thank you for the recommendation, and Blue, thank you so much for making this. But reading about, or actually reading between the lines with what Alastair, what the main character, is really going through, waking up in this robot body after he's been dead for 16 years. Spoiler for the first page. Is very. It's a great way to start this. So, starting with a mystery. How is he there? Why has he been brought back? Who is responsible? And him sort of understanding what it's like now to be, an artificial creation, which, he spent his entire life devoted to making and perfecting. And now he basically is another artificial life form. But, in doing so, I think he's kind of understanding a little bit more about his place, especially after he meets Sula, who is, for all intents and purposes, is him as a young person who has gone through her own changes and her own development. Basically, I guess, being more aware of herself at an earlier age than he has. There's some great conversation that he has with Brendan right as they're kind of exploring their relationship very early on, where it's clear that Alastair has not so much really been comfortable with himself, not so much with his own sexuality, but I think just himself socially. And that, seeing that represented in the book with the character of Alastair, seeing Brendan's sort of discomfort, I think, in his own way with the relationship that they have and the relationship that he has with Sula, and of course Sula's sort of it's not really innocent, I guess, way of looking at these two men who are so important to her. But just sort of seeing it through the eyes of an adolescent who seems so much more sure of herself in most cases. It's really fascinating. So I'm going to get to a question, I suppose. So, one of the things that does come up quite often, and I know Bill mentioned this a little bit, and I really loved, was the issue of of trans and queer, genderqueer experience. That you touch on quite a bit in this book, but I think, the character of Sula beautifully represents that. But also, and I know it's a minor character right now, but the character of Ty.
Yeah, I love Ty.
I love Ty. And,
I love Ty too.
That moment when Sula spots Ty, it gave me sort of the happy, bubbly goosebumps, just because it was such a great moment, and so perfectly encapsulates an adolescent sort of crush at first sight. And I know that a lot of authors tend to model characters on people that they know in real life, or at least people that they've experienced or seen. Do you see this moment where Sula and Ty sort of find each other, even if it's just in a very, very surface-based kind of way? Have you seen that in your own life experience, and where did you pull that from with those characters?
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever gotten that question before. What I would say is that I definitely staged that scene in a specific way, because I do think for a lot of, gaybies, like a lot of like young queer people who are trying to figure out what their deal is, I think like there's a really powerful moment in being able to recognize when, someone else might be like you, maybe not in the exact same way, but it's clear that they are doing something that's similar to what you're doing or what you're trying to do. So, I'd say that there have probably been a few times, like in my younger life, where, I recognized that someone was, maybe like me, or, was doing something in a way that I didn't realize could be done. And, sort of there's that impulse, like that subconscious impulse, like I have to know who they are, like what they're doing. Like I need to like know how they managed to be so cool. And I think that it was especially important for Sulla because, when it comes to writing younger characters, I really wanted to prioritize, how I depicted Sulla and Titus, because in some ways, each of them kind of represent a character type that you don't see a lot of in, with younger protagonists. Like I try to make it fairly clear that Sulla and Al both are they're bisexual, but, of course they manifest in different ways for, a 15-year-old and like a 44-year-old, and one who's like grown up in a more accepting, loving environment, and one who's like a middle-aged closet case. Like that's going to manifest differently. But I also, sort of wanted to talk bring up how, two younger people might come across, transitioning in a different way, because Titus is a assigned female, non-binary kid, and they're sort of, trying to figure out how they want to present themselves to the world. Like they don't necessarily have that, I must be seen this one way by all people, and that's how I want to assert my identity, the way, Sulla might. But, Titus kind of has this nuance with, well, there's all these people who's known me as one way for so long. I don't necessarily want that to be the entirety of how I'm perceived, but I don't really know how to change that or make that discussion happen. So, I feel like that's, something that kids would go through, or that kids would be okay with, that sort of like nuanced state. Mm-hmm. And I wanted, to make sure that it was important to me that a non-binary kid would be okay, be satisfied with sort of that in-between state, but also be perceived as interesting or, mm-hmm. Attractive to, a kid their own age. Like I thought it was really important to sort of how I went about writing these two and what would be important to them and sort of how they conflict in those ways. Like, yeah, they're just really sweet kids. I love exploring their relationship the more I go on.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why I just love those two characters apart, as well as, the scenes that they've had together in the first volume, in that, you can understand both of them are growing and developing in their own way. And I think it's very clear. Sulla, of course, being a robot, but also having transitioned from male to female and being very certain of herself that way. Mm-hmm. Except when she and Al are out. And again, I don't want to spoil too much for this book, because I want the people who are listening to read this and to actually see these scenes, and how they come across. But just the conversation that she and Al have, it's a very interesting perspective that Sulla has about herself that I thought was really fascinating. As a different aspect of who she is and what she is. And then, of course, with her meeting with Ty, of course, is shy themselves, and but also has that moment of recognition with Sulla too. So it's just very well depicted. And I just loved seeing that. It made me happy that you didn't have characters who could and have potentially been in the past, in different other works, sort of demoted to caricatures almost. Mm-hmm. And here they're very, even in volume 1 where, we're only just now introduced to Titus, there's a lot more there under the surface that I think is very clear to a reader, and I think that's really wonderful.
Thank you.
To see. Yeah. So here's another question, because I know you touched upon why how you were a Wired geek from the time that you were a kid. What about comics? How did you kind of come into the whole comics realm, being an artist and a writer, and what got you interested into that field?
Believe it or not, the answer to both of those things was animation originally. I was really interested in animation. I started reading Wired because Lisa Simpson read Wired in a episode about the dot-com bubble in like 1999. And I was really interested in animation. I loved movies. I would like rent movies and I would try, copying characters frame by frame to sort of figure out how they worked. And there were certain, cartoons in like the late 90s, early 2000s that it became more common for like certain people from like the comics world to get involved in cartoons of their own. So I started, like, when I found out that they'd originally done comics, I'd started going to my local comic store a few blocks away, and I just sort of began my education. Like, I picked out a lot of, like, weird indie comics and then also some X-Men, because this was 2001, and there were, X-Men movies happening all over the place. And then I was really lucky in that my, local comic store proprietor was, like, really friendly, and he really wanted to, give me comics that I liked. So he also happened to introduce me to Hellboy and like a lot of, really amazingly drawn, like critically acclaimed indie comics. A lot of it was thanks to like, the people, this really great shop. So, I mean, starting out, it was kind of a mix of things, like lots of American indie comics, Hellboy. There's certain like artists in the Marvel and DC lines that I really liked. And then later on, I grew up during the manga boom. So there were definitely like manga artists whose work kind of found their influence. Like off the top of my head, I can think of Naoki Urasawa, whose comic Pluto was a huge influence on Oh Human Star in particular. Like that's a really great murder mystery in a, android populated world. There's Hiromu Arakawa, who did Full Metal Alchemist. She was a huge inspiration on me. I don't know. It's one of those things where I just tried to like consume everything I could, and then eventually just certain influences filter down through all the rest. But yeah, it was it all started with animation, funnily enough.
No, that's great. And I've heard similar stories for people growing up in a certain time period, and I'm kind of from that same era a little bit myself, because I actually started in comics and then came into the animation afterwards, and the anime boom of the 90s into the 2000s. So you see a real big mix of styles that come out of that, and it was a perfect time to be inspired.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see, when there's a bunch of people like artists your own age and how they kind of, you can tell they were into the same things or the same artists, whether it was like Bruce Timm or Osamu Tezuka or, Sailor Moon, like, and sort of how they filter and interpret those that, influences differently is a lot of fun.
Speaking of Sailor Moon, when you were younger, what was your favorite scout?
Oh, it was Sailor Mercury. For most of my childhood, I was really interested in like overachiever, know-it-all characters who like loved to work really hard and were maybe a little too, know-it-all for their own good. So I identified a lot with Sailor Mercury. These days, I'm a big fan of Sailor Jupiter also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually one of my big things in high school. I was the only boy in my group of girls who really loved Sailor Moon. So, that was my Sailor Moon group, and I think I don't know if I even got a Sailor Scout. That was one of the sad things. Like I kind of denied myself like which Sailor Scout I'd be. Although I know for a fact I would definitely be Sailor Moon. I'm too klutzy to be anybody else, really. It's just
cute, though. Sailor Moon's also like herself has also really grown on me. Like I really appreciate her character a lot more than when I was a kid. Like I can definitely see her more appealing qualities now.
She was always the dopiest, but she was also the sweetest, so that's what made me.
Yeah, I like her like unconditional friendliness. Like that's definitely a great quality.
Exactly. Something I try to strive towards.
I have to say, as this exchange was going on, Blue, whether you know it, in talking with Steve, you're talking with our resident Magnolaverse through
Oh,
the
really?
years, and
Yes.
our resident manga boom kid. So, Steve, please tell me you had a big smile as that conversation was
Oh
going.
gosh, I was beaming. I was actually beaming as soon as you mentioned that Lisa Simpson was reading
Yeah.
an issue of Wired. I was like, yes, yes, right there. There's and there you go. Tie it back into Sailor Mercury. You know, it's the really super smart character that knows everything and maybe a little too smart for their own good, but
Yeah,
still wonderful.
I can relate strongly to that character type. There was one of those like Twitter things going around a month or so ago that was, yourself in 9 characters or whatever it
Oh
was.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I realized I ended up doing 2 because there's one character type I really identify with, but one that I'm always a sucker for, whenever I see it in media. And the first one is like that brainy know-it-all kind of like, try hard. So I got like Sailor Mercury, I had Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, I had Lisa Simpson, I had Newt Geisler from Pacific Rim. Like that was like me, for a lot of my life. And then the other one is like the character who's like either super strong or super big or invulnerable and tough, but is secretly like really, vulnerable and sweet and loves small animals. So I had like Hellboy and I had Alphonse from Full Metal Alchemist and like
Mhm.
all these other characters. Like that is something that will always enjoy. And then I realized that was basically just Brendan and Al. That was just those 2 character types, and I just made them smooch.
That's perfect because that's when I see those 2 characters. I mean, Brandon is just this bundle of energy, and I can do that. I totally know how to do that and know how to fix that, and I don't care if it kind of steps on Al's toes a little bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And of course, Al is just the big, strong, silent, but kind of schmoopy type
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't want to let on that he's actually very schmoopy. So.
That's
But
not a word I've heard spoken in a long, long time.
I don't think I've actually said it aloud in probably about 10 years. But anyway, it perfectly to me that's what I felt while reading Al. It's just this, strong, silent, let me just do my stuff and in silence, and I'll just, be over here in the corner. And then the sly glances, the little looks back, the ballerina robot. I mean, those things to me just really open up these characters, and allow me as a reader to identify with them, even though that's not always, the intended purpose. But at the same time, it's nice to be able to see a little bit of myself in those characters too. So yeah, that's like all readers, we're all selfish little jerks. But
oh yeah.
But no, I mean, that's fascinating. I just it's always interesting to me how people come to comics, but also how comics influence their work and what kind of things sort of that they build on. And it's interesting that you're also a fan of Hellboy and that the Mignolaverse, because there is a darkness. It's a very dark universe. I mean, there's some fun, interesting, and kind of cool, lighthearted interactions in the Hellboy books and BPRD and all of that. But there's that sort of underlying sort of, there's a deep, horrible mystery at the core of things.
Mm-hmm.
And bringing back to A Human Star, that's another way that it draws the reader in, I think, because there is that mystery. It still starts with a mystery. And even at the end of the first volume, we don't really, we haven't gotten that much farther into finding out, how Al is back, what's brought him back. And that's why I'm so excited for volume 2. And I know that you do have work that is available online on ohumanstar.com. But I'm one of those guys that I totally have to have it in my hot, sweaty little hands. So can you maybe tell us about the Kickstarter that is going to play?
I absolutely can. So right now and running through November 3rd, I am running the Kickstarter to fund the first ever print volume of Volume 2, which again collects chapters 4, 5, and then a side story that first appeared in the Beyond All Ages Queer Sci-Fi Fantasy Anthology from last year. It's a side story about Sulla, so I thought I would include it in there as well. I am also funding through that Kickstarter the reprint of Volume 1, since the initial printing from 2 years ago's Kickstarter is almost out. So I am going to be funding a printing of that as well. I am looking for $27,000. I have, of this recording, raised $23,480. So we're almost there. But yeah, it's got 15 days left to hit goal.
That is awesome. That's great to hear. It's especially for something like this where it's a continuation of a work that you've put out, to be this far along so quickly is great. That's good to hear.
It's surpassed any of my expectations I may have had going into, the project. Like, my readership has constantly surprised me.
That's good. We'll have that information in the show notes as well. So if anybody listening would like to contribute, and hopefully you do, we'll have that information on where to find the Kickstarter.
Now, Blue, we had just mentioned through what Steve had discussed there about the webcomic component of A Human Star. And I was wondering, in terms of doing a webcomic and where you have been fairly regimented in getting a page out every Monday, how has that influenced the storytelling? I mean, are there some times where you're like, oh, damn it, I just want to give people 2 pages right now, or has that had an effect on the pace of the storyline? And like, what have you taken away from doing the overarching story in that format?
There's definitely a discipline component involved, in which you have to, when I'm writing out the script and working on, thumbnailing the initial drawings of what I imagine the pages will look like. I understand that each of these pages is going up more or less one at a time. If I'm having a really good month, I might do 2 pages a week. But when it comes to a fairly quiet contemplative sequence where I know, when everything's said and done and it's in a print volume, it'll be way easier to just flip through the pages and sort of appreciate that drawn out pacing. But, in the time being, when it's a web comic, it may feel glacial. Mm-hmm. That's just one of those things where I've had to accept it, because I know that when all said and done and the archive's there or the print book is there, it will have the effect that I'm looking for. The one thing that I do try and do when I'm composing a page is that there is something that when you've reached the end of the page, you go, oh, I need to see what happens on the next page, or, oh, something's been resolved or leads to a new thing. I try and have some kind of resolution, which, I mean, I guess that's kind of a misnomer. It's not necessarily you're given brand new, a resolving thing every page, brand new information or some satisfying action, but something that's a beat. I try and make sure every page has a beat that will complement whatever comes next. So that's definitely something that you have to have an eye for when it comes to something quieter, as opposed to a big action sequence or a text heavy, segment of dialogue. But it definitely helps in, keeping that pacing going over a long drawn out online post schedule.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about why I was connecting with this story so closely. And I think of other stories of some prominent characters, whether it be Captain America or Buck Rogers, of that notion of man out of time, mm-hmm. That we do see Alastair in. And it was interesting to me that you don't see him, I don't want to say suffering from the same things that characters like that would in relation to becoming accustomed to new surroundings. I think, and I'm hoping you can address this. It seems you have the twist of him being a futurist, and that he is he's living what he's anticipating to some degree. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that, because I think there's more to that element of that character. We don't really see him. The culture shock is more on a emotional level and not the type of culture shock that we normally see characters in that position.
Yeah, I think for him it's much more internalized in that, that, yeah, this is something that he visualized or wanted to come to pass, or, this is something that he was personally working towards, with his entire career. But in a way, he's distanced from it, not only because, he's a beneficiary of, his advancements in a way that he didn't necessarily expect or want, but also in that, so much of Al's self-worth is tied to his work, that when he feels like, that's been taken care of for him, or that's being replaced, with another person, like, I feel like he's kind of unmoored in a lot of ways. Like so much of the personal changes that Al's gone through has led to this sense of isolation and, uncertainty of what your place is, in addition to all these like truly profound, upsetting physical changes too. I'm curious, have you ever, either of you ever read the series Concrete by Paul Chadwick?
I have to plead ignorance after 1990, but yes. I was familiar with the early Dark Horse Presents books with him in it, and
Yeah.
probably sometime around 1990 when I stopped reading everything Dark Horse put out.
Yeah, I started collecting the collected editions that they put out in recent years. I love what Chadwick does with that character. Like, Concrete is one of my most, like, one of the characters I find most fascinating in comics, and the way how he's written, because this is like a person, an intellectual kind of soft-spoken person who has undergone this, like, frankly horrifying change in the way he like interacts with people, and just the environment around him is so profoundly different now. But the way that he, intellectually realizes like, oh, I get to do some cool stuff because of this. Oh, this is interesting. I can help people, or, I've always wondered sort of what the consequences are of this, but realizing how he's isolated from people he loves or people that he wants to stay close to, on a physical and emotional level, is just really, really well done. Like, I hope when I, write Alastair and sort of just think about what Al would go through, that even comes close to, what Chadwick achieved, writing Concrete.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I just love those sorts of character studies of someone going through these, really profound, physical and emotional changes.
Right.
That's why I love writing about robots and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think with Concrete, you had some of the best ever use of thought balloons.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Just to tug at your heart, and and also the incorporation, which I think what you have done here, of real life physics, of some of Concrete struggles are with the condition that he's in now, and apart from the aliens, like, everything is very realistic. Apart from the series of events that put him into this body. You're making me want to read Concrete again. So
yeah,
you're achieving something here.
They're really good collections. It's also really interesting reading stuff from that era of comics, which is like, the really like, super in-depth like line art, and the thought bubbles, which I feel like are a thing that have kind of gone out of style in contemporary comics, but he does use them well, and the dialogue is really good. Like, it's just really interesting to, go back to this kind of retro style of comics, but see it done in a really good way. Yeah. Like, it's kind of a good way to keep me balanced with like the stuff that I would more naturally draw to in terms of art style, or, pacing style, or that kind of thing.
Now, apart from No Human Star, you also have another project coming up called Meal. And
yes,
why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
I absolutely can. This will be my first kind of all-in-one graphic novel as opposed to a serialized comic. It'll be coming out through Iron Circus Comics, likely in late 2017 or early 2018. And it is about a young chef who is enthusiastic about and specializes in insect cuisine, and she is trying to get a job at a restaurant where everyone also specializes in insect cuisine. And it is sort of my homage / tribute to what I affectionately call food shonen. It's like this Japanese comic genre that's just a hero's journey through extremely specific cuisine specialties. Like there's Antique Bakery that's about, the drama of a bakery staff. There's The Drops of God, which is all about wine. Like I love that stuff. It's so ridiculous. And I am personally really interested in the growing interest in food, cooking with insects and food with insects and, insect restaurants. And I really wanted to, incorporate that interest into a genre of comics I find really appealing.
Wow. Okay.
I know, it's a lot. And it's one of those things where, I went to the publisher, Spike of Iron Circus, who specializes in more niche stories, but kind of she's good at finding their audience. And I was like, okay, I know that this is niche, but if you can't do this, I can't do this with anyone else. So what do you think? And she's like, yeah, we can do this. Like, the thing I like to say is that I personally believe that when it comes to interest in eating insects and sort of knowledge of, what it entails and like how appealing it is, we're at the point with insects that we were with sushi in like 1986. All we sort of need is that Breakfast Club scene where Molly Ringwald opens up her lunch and there's sushi and John Bender's like, what is that? And then, in a couple decades, there will be sushi restaurants in Nebraska. Like, I just feel like there needs to be one appealing narrative where people might sort of like get it, or at least find it interesting or, fun to read in a story. But yeah, it's something that I always found really fun and, interesting to read about. So, yeah. I gotta get used to explaining this to quite a lot of people in the next year and a half, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure it's probably going to be one of the few, the few comics out there that does approach insect cookery.
Yes,
So.
I can't imagine that will be quite a crowded space.
You never know, though. Maybe
never
2019.
know.
Maybe 2019. Your work will inspire others. So 2019 will be the year of, insect cuisine comics.
Honestly, I would love that because it's insect cuisine is pretty much everywhere except for Europe and the Americas. Like it's always been part of traditional cuisine in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. So I would love to see comics from people living in these areas, like, talking about their families, traditional recipes or things that they love to do, or just kind of going about their everyday life where you can, get fried tarantulas from the lady who lives, 2 doors down from you, or, how every summer you'll make grasshopper tacos. Those are things that are totally real and have been real for a long time. And I would love to read more, comics from folks who live in those parts of the world.
Okay, well, before we wrap up with Blue Steve, is there anything else you want to ask?
Well, no, I was actually just I was just thinking about chocolate-covered ants that I've seen recently featured, and I was like, now I'm starting to think more that maybe I should go and find a bag of those somewhere, and definitely not make my own because the ants around here, no, totally not.
I can refer you to some suppliers of human consumption grade mealworms that are excellent in curry.
Oh, well, we totally grow our own because we have turtles. So we actually I have a mealworm farm in my house, which is, not something that I usually advertise. But guess what, everybody? I have a mealworm farm in my house for our turtles because we have turtles.
Steve has a zoo.
I do.
So, yeah.
How many turtles do you have?
Well, just the 3. And during the summer, my husband actually built an outside enclosure for them. So it's actually about the size of a large dog run that he's sort of made into, this really fantastic little sort of theme park for them. It's got, logs and all sorts of, plants in there that will flower flower and drop so that they can eat little plants.
That sounds wonderful.
Oh yeah, they get the slugs in there.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, given their speed, would you really call it a turtle run?
It's more like a turtle trundle.
Okay.
because that's about what they do. Although Sabrina's awesome because she will just hang out in her pool and just kind of like with her arms over the side and just kind of like look around and sun herself, which is very cool.
It's too cute.
Anyway, enough about my turtles. But again, Blue, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Oh Human Star and of course Meal. When that will be dropping next year, hopefully.
Yep.
But definitely, I am really excited to read Volume 2. I've actually been forcing myself not to go back to the webcomic so I can surprise myself.
Whereas I am totally up to date.
Yeah.
And I also have to give a salute to you because the most recent 3 pages, comics that are what I almost call them instrumental comics, where where it's just image as the reliance for the propulsion of the story. It's one of the hardest things to do in the world. This is what I love the most about A Human Star. Is like, I don't know what comes next. I really don't know what comes next. There's no way I can predict this. So, just thank you so much for providing this piece of work that is so sweet and so intriguing. It's a wonderful marriage of so many different elements.
It's my pleasure, and I really appreciate the length that you guys have read and looked over my work and talk to me about it. Like that makes me so happy to make me realize that I might actually be nailing some of the things I was attempting to do.
Okay, so again, we're going to be posting the Kickstarter, and we're going to be strong-arming some of our regular listeners into contributing. We're good at that. But beyond that, where can people contact you on the interwebs?
Other than ohumanstar.com, you can find me at my personal webpage, which is bluedelliquanti.com. And then you can also find me on Twitter and Tumblr under my name, which is, again, Blue Delliquanti.
Awesome. Blue, thank you so much for coming on, and best of success when realizing that Kickstarter. Hopefully by the time we release this episode, you will have already been funded. And once that second volume has come out, or if you want to come back with Meal, please do so, because it was just wonderful talking to you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And yeah, I would love to come back. Thank you so much, guys.
Yay. Thank you so much for coming.
Steve, wasn't that a great interview?
That was an awesome
interview.
She's just so much fun to talk with and hear, and she put up with me, so that was good.
Oh, I think you two are kindred spirits.
It was just great. The hearing that she as a kid loved Mercury, but now sees herself a little bit more as a Jupiter is perfect. And that kind of what's funny if you tie that into her book that she has coming up, hopefully next year, Meal, where it's kind of that she was describing it's more like food manga, like cooking type shonen manga. Sailor Jupiter is this big, tough outside person, just constantly loyal and really super strong and everything, but is also a really big cook and loves making little snacky foods for her fellow scouts, which is awesome. So that kind of works. Anyway.
You are speaking a foreign language to me when it comes to Sailor Moon, I have to say. I don't think I've read one page of a Sailor Moon manga or seen one moment of an anime. I can say that. I've never have. Yeah.
Yeah, if you read one page or saw one moment, you would be horrendously confused.
Okay. So this is going to be it for the episode. Initially, we were planning to do a much bigger New York Comic Con wrap-up episode where we incorporated Blue's interview with some of reminiscing, I don't know what to put it, what happened to 3 of us at New York Comic Con while we were there. But we're going to hold off on that until next week. We're also going to have a special guest who may be talking about another Kickstarter. So hang on to your hats. You're going to be getting our New York Comic Con wrap-up episode. That'll be next week. We wanted to get something out to you. It's been a couple weeks now. Hope you enjoyed what we had. And we're going to wrap up this show like we do every other show with our Wolves of the Week segment, which is where we spotlight something, be it a comic book or a film or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we want to signify to you, fair listener, that you may enjoy in partaking. So, Steve, what is your Wolf of the Week?
My Wolf of the Week is a TV show, and unfortunately it's probably a TV show that most people are not going to be able to see, at least in the United States or Canada. But if you have any UK listeners out there, and I know there's got to be a couple, Morgana Robinson's The Agency is hands down one of the funniest, I would say, impersonator-based sketch comedy shows currently running on TV today. Morgana Robinson is one of those rubber-faced kind of people who also is really good in makeup and doing impressions. And her turn as several, I think practically almost a dozen, different famous UK figures and pop culture stars is absolutely hilarious. Her Adele is hands down amazing as a just basically the town gossip. She's great. Like every time she does Adele telling a story, she just starts talking about like her relatives, like, oh my god, she just went down to the pub and she had it out with Chris, and Chris was just, oh my god, really funny. She does Miranda Hart. She does Joanna Lumley, and she's amazing as Joanna Lumley. There's just a great mix of characters. If you're a U.S. viewer, Canadian viewer, you'll probably recognize more than half of them. Some of them are a little bit more obscure unless you're a big fan of Neighbours or Coronation Street. But definitely hilarious, has me rolling every week. I believe it's a 6-episode series. If you have a chance to get a hold of episodes somehow, definitely check it out.
Okay. You do know I did see Adele fairly recently live in concert.
Oh yeah. Did she talk a lot about her family and any kind of like fights that they got out in Walmart?
No, but no, she talks a lot.
Yes.
She's a talker. She's a talker. One of my favorite Adele takeoffs is there's a video. I have to find out who it was. It's not just one person, but they did this fake red carpet of Les Miserables when the film came out, and they had different actresses singing songs from it. So they had Adele singing "Empty Chairs and Empty Tables." But it comes out as empty chairs and empty tables. I'll have to find that and post it somehow, but I'm not going to be able to do that quickly. My woof of the week is something music-oriented, and my woof goes out to a group called Anthony and the Mountain, who are out of Utica, New York. They're led by queer singer, songwriter, and pianist Anthony Bianco. They have a new album out called I Felt Tall and Full of Blood. The way that they characterize their music is savage pop, and I think that's pretty apt. Definitely electronic based. If you're a child of the 80s, there's a lot of stuff you can hang your hat on and enjoy. One track in particular from this album called Thrones has really knocked me out. I'm going to be playing a different track as the outro music for this episode, a song called Ray Gun. And they are on Newlywed Records, and if you want to sample them, you can go to anthonyinthemountain.bandcamp.com. They also have a SoundCloud page. They are at Anthony in the Mountain on Twitter, and they also have a Facebook page. And I liked it a lot, and I hope you will too. Sample and see if it's in your wheelhouse. That's our episode for this time out. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. You can subscribe to us through iTunes, and we're working on some other platforms where you'll be able to access the episodes. Just another thing I wanted to address, slowly but surely we were getting the entirety of our archive out. I'm hoping that by March of next year, maybe even a little early, maybe January, all of the episodes that previously were exclusive to the Earth 2 Podcast Network will be available again in our feed. If anybody's clamoring for a particular episode, though, that somehow disappeared for you, let me know. I'll be happy to expedite that. So until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Steve Morey.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion. And again, we'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Woof! I got a razor in my purse called Sunshine, you know what I mean.